I run a website called Atlas Obscura. And Atlas Obscura is, we call it a compendium of the world's wonders, curiosities, and esoterica. And the way it works, actually, is it touches on some of the topics that we had earlier, which is essentially, I call it a company, but it's sort of better described in a way as a community, both because that's sort of what it feels like to me, and we also don't make a lot of money. So, essentially, we're a community of travelers and sort of people with various specific thematic interests, whether it be kind of catacombs or unusual infrastructural setups. And what people do is they add to this website. They send in their interesting places they know about. And sometimes they stumble on them when they're traveling, and sometimes they've had a long list in their head that they wanted to, add, and they find us and say, this is where I've been meaning to put my, 50 crazy electrical projects that are around the world, places where, we have one user who his focus is on like sort of AC and DC oddities, which is like pretty specific, and I don't always totally understand it, but I think for him, it's like he has his own audience, people who come to look at his material specifically about that stuff. So, it's a broad range of stuff on the Atlas. You can see here in the top, there's the Red Hook Warehouse, which is just a short distance from where our offices are, and I didn't know it was there. It's a giant abandoned warehouse that's been used for a bunch of different functions. And stuff in Germany, in Italy. And so we get this, we cover it's outsider art projects, it's small museums, medical museums, it's crazy natural phenomenon that somehow have sort of flown under the radar. So we're looking for anything that has a great story and we feel like it hasn't been told, or it deserves more love than it's getting in the world. So that is what I do, and I spend, we also put on events as well, where we try and take people to these places, give them some kind of experience, get a backroom tour of a museum, sort of see the hidden workings, or a tour of a city tunnel. I've been trying to get into tunnel number 3 in New York for a few years now. They are not letting me down there, ever. Anyway, so I spend a lot of time doing this, thinking about what discovery means, what it is to be a discoverer now, and sort of the various definitions of that idea. And so, I also have a romantic kind of side of me, so I also really like some of the classic discoverers. I think this is like when people think of a discoverer, they think of Roald Amundsen or others, but I mean, this guy was like the most badass of all Arctic and Antarctic explorers. He would, other people would try stuff and fail miserably or all die, and then he would be like, oh, that seems like a great idea, and then he would just do it like a few years later. So actually, the Northwest Passage expedition is one of these where some folks did it, the whole crew got killed, ended up eating each other, which they found out later. So he did this. It took him 3 years. One of his crew members died. It was a small crew, it was like 6 people. When he got to where he was trying to get to, he then had to ski for 500 miles, which took a few months to just telegraph and say like, hey, we're not dead. And so this is kind of like, this is what I think most people have in mind when they think of a discoverer. And I got the chance recently to go to the Arctic Circle, which I was really excited about because I sort of love this stuff. And so it was a really wonderful trip. I got to spend some time with reindeer herders. They're some of the last folks who do wild reindeer herding, so that they're never penned and they follow them around. And it's one of these interesting things because it's a very rustic life, but then also, for his daughter's birthday, she got a DS. So it's this kind of like living with a foot in each world. And so it was beautiful. I loved it. And so, I got to see some really incredible things. This is totally not Photoshop. That happened. But I also saw something else there that sort of inspired this talk. As we were kind of coming near town, this is above the Arctic Circle, we crest the hill, and we see this thing sort of shining off in the distance. This red glow is coming, and that is when I saw the Arctic H&M. which was a little bit surprising. I mean, like I say, not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, Laplanders are entitled to disposable fashion as much as the rest of us, I suppose. But it was weird. It made me think, what does discovery mean in an age where there's an Arctic H&M and I was Skyping from this reindeer herder's house and, I have Google Maps, and suddenly you sort of say, where are we with this idea of discovery? Is it gone? Is there anything left to discover? Have we seen it all? Is it all sort of taken care of, and that's it? So I started thinking about this a lot, and this is the horror, right? Is that this is what we sort of have? Is we're sort of moving towards this gray neutral of corporate homogeny, and so you get sort of this endless strip malls, and you've seen landscapes that really feel like this, where it's just one kind of big box after the other, and the fear is that we're really in this process of globalization that includes, it's a real mixed bag, but we're ending up with this kind of completely discovered and very monotone world, which really bums me out. So this is a random grab of facts that basically sort of I tried to pull together, but we are changing, and it is a mixed bag. So we're becoming much more urban. 70% of the world, we're already over 50%, but by 2050, 70% of the world is going to be living in cities. And talk a lot. 70% of the world has cell phones, including like much of the world's poorest populations. Although what's interesting is sometimes this has been used as an argument that the world is flat. But actually, everyone just calls their neighbors. They call like 10 miles down, and they're like, "Hey, Bill, I need that thing." We travel a lot more. Like at this moment, there are 500,000 people flying at speeds, evolution never designed us for it, through the sky. And travel is becoming more democratized. I mean, the idea of the tourist was for, these were rich aristocrats doing the grand tour through Europe, and it was a very small set of people who got to do any kind of any kind of sightseeing type travel. But today, that's a little bit different. If you're sort of above the very bottom economic level, there's a good chance you take a vacation somewhere. And basically, all of China has sort of just started to come online into the travel industry, which will be really interesting to see how that plays out. But there's an enormous amount of people who are just starting to do sort of recreational travel from China now. So a bunch of other things. 33,000 McDonald's. They're so widespread that they mirror the financial health of the world pretty well. So they, when there's a global recession, McDonald's sales go down because they're so tied into the world economy. Walmart is the biggest employer in the world. There's a New Scientist article where they tried to use some mapping that they do for ecosystems, in financial systems, and the result that came back squared pretty strongly with the sort of the 1% idea, which is that a very small group of transnational companies, not through collusion, but just through sort of the happenstance of how these structures end up forming, control a wild amount of the world's wealth and the wealth networks. No place is spared. There's a McDonald's on the South Pole in the station, in the big 3,000 person station down there. There's some alarming sets of things in here. There's some worrying ideas. In fact, some of this stuff is so ubiquitous. This is the McFarthest map, which is every one of these points represents a McDonald's. And so what the search was for was, what is the place that is farthest from McDonald's? So somewhere in South Dakota, not clear exactly where, but somewhere in South Dakota is the McFarthest spot, where you are the farthest from all McDonald's in any direction. It's not that far. It's like 100 miles, and that's your maximum range away from the radius. So this is great. You can travel the world, and you can stay in the exact same hotel. You'll see the same kind of supply chains and shipping areas all over the world, and sort of corporate parks. You can stay in these places and exist in these places that are essentially kind of neutral. They have no they're there. It's like being in an airport. You sort of you're in this non-space. So that's weird and alarming a little bit, because I care a lot about sort of local flavor and the uniqueness of the world. Luckily, because of what I do, I have a lot of countervailing evidence also that this is happening. All of this stuff is real, but that there's also something else happening, right? So all of the same things that make it possible for these transnational companies to kind of blanket the world in this slightly terrifying way, it also makes it, from the top down, it can be very homogenizing. From the bottom up, individual uses, all of those, the 70% of the population that has cell phones and access to the internet and is participating in this global culture, it actually has a countervailing effect. It's the other side of this picture where we start to get kinds of sharing and communication and discoveries of things that we wouldn't have without some of the elements that have brought us sort of the globalization. So, and wonderful things come out of these trends. I mean, yeah, Wikipedia, Atlas Obscura. Basically, the internet is a product of the globalization trends, and it furthers globalization, but in some very positive ways. Not always, but I think there are a number of really good things about it. So, and I personally, I get to work with absolute strangers from all over the world who write and say, I'm an Egyptian, and I found your website, and there are these amazing places that no one knows and no one travels to, and they're going to get closed down or destroyed, and that's horrible. And so I want to share these with the world. So, and that is, I get this kind of the best case scenario, at least in this work, of what that kind of globalization and that kind of international sharing can bring. And so here, I'm just going to run you through a few of because I kind of totally bummed everyone out with my big, McDonald's are everywhere and, there's nothing left. I'm going to run through some of the countervailing evidence that there are some really amazing places left to be discovered. And actually, give me a shout. I'm curious to know, if you guys are familiar with any of these places, just shout it out or raise your hand. I'm interested to know kind of how off the radar these things are. So this is the gates of hell in Turkmenistan. In the 1970s, the Soviets had a drilling rig there, and it fell into the desert. And in good Soviet style, they just walked away, and then because it was leaking natural gas and was deadly, they lit it on fire. So it has been on fire for 40 years. It's 300 feet across, and it's there. You can see it on Google Maps, the little red dot. So this is the gates of hell. Really not a major tourist destination, but I find it quite amazing. This is Quechua in Peru. It's one of the last hand-woven Incan bridges, which was part of the Incan highway system for hundreds and hundreds of years. Every year they rebuild this. I actually got, that's me up there, I got a chance to go there and see how they make it and meet the bridge master, who, he has all of this knowledge and he oversees the construction each year. And it's really just grass. It's the grass that's growing all around you. They weave it together. They do 40 arms length. It takes basically 3 days. They do it overnight. And then they throw the old bridge in the water, very unceremoniously, actually. They're like, and then they put up the new bridge. So this is Cactus Dome on Runit Island in Micronesia. And I should point out, not all the stuff in the atlas is necessarily cheery or beautiful, but it's all interesting. So this is basically after the atomic testing in Micronesia, they had all of this topsoil that was radioactive. And this is what they did with it. They carted it off the island, put it on a deserted island, and then covered it in a big concrete shell. So it's there. It's still radioactive, although less so now. And yeah, that's pretty much that's what it is now. So this is the Capuchin catacombs in Palermo. I could do a whole talk on just catacombs. They're amazing and rich throughout Europe. And they're starting to get more kind of tourist interest, which is, I think weird for some of the churches because they're like, oh, all right. But I find them fascinating. Again, Kawah Ijen in East Java. This is a sulfur mining plant hill. It's really beautiful looking, terrible to work at, but is another piece in this kind of weird globalized world. And I think this is not a tourist spot at all. I think maybe only these guys and occasionally a photographer comes here. I love these. These are maybe one of my favorite things, and really came I'm sort of proud of these because when we got this submission, there was basically nothing on the internet about them. So we sort of got the chance to break the story. which is, these are the root bridges in Cherrapunji, India, which is one of the wettest areas of India. And they graft them together it's a 15-year process, basically. They build little wooden bridges and then let the roots grow over them. And then slowly the roots interweave and intertwine and come together and form strong working bridges and then last for years and actually get stronger and stronger over time as the roots continue to kind of grow into each other. And as an example of kind of a vernacular, what's called arbortecture, which is like a big thing, we're going to grow our cities. And this they've been doing for hundreds of years, and no one really was hip to it. And luckily there was a real threat that they were going to tear them down, because they're not that practical. It's actually a lot faster to just throw some steel cabling across and make a really fast bridge. But through a sort of small but growing tourist industry to come and see these now, they have an economic incentive essentially to keep them up, keep creating them, and teach other people how to make them. So these are Snake Island, Brazil is awesome. There's not a lot of pictures of it because that island is covered in snakes, so people don't go there. There's literally one poisonous snake for every meter of the island. And they hang from trees, and it's like a really, the Brazilian Navy actually will not let you go there. If you try to go there, the Brazilian Navy will intercept you because like the 2 people who have gone there got killed, except for scientific expeditions where they've gone in full gear so that they don't get dead. Another crazy island, Ball's Pyramid in the Pacific Ocean. This is a nice story of not just sort of this place, but rediscovering a whole species. So this, which is the Howe Island stick insect, also known as the land lobster, which is a much more accurate name for it. It's really big. It's like this big. They thought it was extinct. They thought that it had been eaten off of the large island that had existed on Lord Howe by rats when a ship went aground. Recently, they sent a scientific team to this rock that's like really just this crazy barren rock, and they found one bush on the side of it with a colony of like 20 of these. And they were able to take them to Australia, breed them. And so however you feel about these things existing in the world now, there's a bunch of them now. And so they've got a great, it's a real success story for this kind of magnificent but horrifying insect. And then, this is a tower, there's a whole submerged town under there, but the bell tower sticks out. And there's like 10 of these around the world, like riff on just towers coming out of water. I chose this one because it was a kind of nice sister to it. It's in Denmark. It's an old lighthouse where the sands have slowly overtaken it, and it's just, they are abandoned, sort of emerging from. So there are a lot of wonderful places. And this is an important thing. This isn't just crazy far-flung locations. This, my friends, is 45 minutes away from here. This is called the Glory Hole Spillway. Make of the name what you want. I don't know why they chose that, but it's a giant piece of infrastructure that essentially deals with water overflow. But from the road, like walking up to this, it looks like some kind of space portal is happening, or like gravitational anomaly is underway. This is 45 minutes away. So I think there is more amazing stuff, a lot closer than most people realize. And that's kind of my purpose in life, is to kind of help people realize that. And in fact, I wanted to go back to a couple of the slides that I kind of threw in there as these are like the throwaway spaces that are worthless and have nothing of wonder about them. This is the corporate park. There is Roppongi Hills in Japan. You would never know this. You'd go here, it would look like a corporate park. It would be boring. Except all of the fish in this pond are descendants of space fish. In '94, they brought fish up to on the Columbia shuttle, before its disaster, they bred them up there to see what would happen, and then they brought them back and they put them in this pond, and the fish there are now many generations away. But I love the fact that those fish came from space, and that's what's in that pond. That totally changes the way you feel about this place. This is actually very close to where I live. It's in the Bronx. It is a quote-unquote space of banana control. So this is, to me, a wonder that comes directly out of the process of globalization. So as soon as they start shipping millions of bananas all over the world, there's a problem. They keep them refrigerated, but you want them ripe when you bring them to the store, right? So you get these green bananas, and they need to sit for a while and get ready. So there are these huge spaces that all they have in them is bananas at in slightly different temperature rooms. So I don't remember exact temperatures, but 64 degrees, it's 5 days. At 66 degrees, it's 4 days. So they plan this, and then there's actually a problem with this. They have to help ripen them. They use this organic compound that's also volatile and explosive. So there would regularly be banana warehouse explosions, which were like devastating and violent. They've changed the process now, so there's less banana warehouse explosions. But this is a space that you would walk by, never look at twice, but is actually part of this whole thing we're talking about, this whole wild, interconnected world, and really weird and interesting. Yeah, and the banana color guide is awesome. So if you can figure out, you can be like, oh, this is a 4. Anyway, this is just a hotel room. I don't have anything interesting. There's probably something interesting about this random hotel room, but I don't know what it is. So all these places that I went through, these were sent by strangers to the Atlas. And the same tools that drive all of this globalization can also help people to find and experience the world in new, rich ways. All of this, and these are not necessarily, when I talk about discovery, these aren't necessarily people who they were the first person ever there. I think that maybe isn't what we're doing, but I think that's not necessarily true of the original discoverers either. There's very few. They just went somewhere and then told Europe about it, or so there were already people there, and that's kind of. I think discovery for me is more about sharing what you find with your community, with the people that you know, and in doing so, you create this larger, richer world for each other. And so I think because we all have these tools, we can make ourselves into discoverers. In fact, we're already sort of automatically, we're already being drafted into this stuff all the time. And I wanted to, before I go on, I want to make a point, which is that some of this stuff kind of bears out, some of the anti-homogenization stuff bears out in travel statistics, which is really nice to see. Is that basically the niche travel market is really on the rise, and it runs the gamut. There's agritourism, birth tourism, culinary tourism, cultural tourism, ecotourism, extreme tourism, geotourism, heritage tourism, LGBT tourism, medical tourism, nautical tourism, pop culture tourism, religious tourism, slum tourism, war tourism, wildlife tourism. And I chose pourism as slum tourism is a particular thing. And it's interesting. That's a whole topic on itself, because sometimes it's run by the community and it's good, and sometimes it's run by not the community and it's not so good. And I chose types of tourism that I find really interesting, which is eclipse tourism, people who just go around the world, they find where the eclipse is. In 2010, there was an eclipse over Easter Island. So that was a big deal for eclipse tourists, and I really wished I could be there, because that seems amazing. Drug tourism is a huge thing and takes a bunch of different forms. When I was in South America, we talked to a guide we were in the Amazon, and he led a 3-week trip through the Amazon, and it was miserable. The Amazon is not a nice place to be traveling. It's wet, and it's, there's a million insects. Basically so that this group of people could meet these Indians and do a drug that they blow into your nose and lasts, I think, 45 seconds long. It's like the experience is 45-second kind of, but apparently it's a life-changing thing, because these people were dead set on doing it. Waterfall tourism, eco-doom tourism, which is sort of a bummer, but it's basically see it before it goes. It's like people who travel to places that they think are going to be gone in 50 years. But all of this stuff, this travel, accommodation, and experience, people are looking, I think all of this sense of homogenization is actually really driving a search, and all the tools we have to look for this stuff. Like 20 years ago, if you were like, I want to go, I'm a nautical tourist, like your guy would be like, your travel agent would be like, okay, I'm not sure. And now these have entire industry niches devoted to each one of these things. So as I was saying before, we're being co-opted. Like, we are already sort of acting as discoverers for Yelp, for Google, for all of these services that we use to find our way. And we're also being made into sort of casual cartographers, whether we want it or not. If you use a geo service, we are becoming sort of a piece, one of the millions and millions of builders of what is probably the greatest cartography revolution in history. In fact, it sort of jumps the shark. It's not, what we're creating isn't really just a bigger, better map. When we do all of this kind of stuff, when we use our location services, or when you tell Google that their directions are weird. We're creating is basically the beginning of a new environment, of this kind of, and this is sort of one of these endpoints of, I think, all of these trends is, on top of, the built environment, we sort of, it lives on top of the natural environment, and that's very normal for us. But what's starting to happen is that the data environment is also going to kind of overlay all of this. And it's going to have a sort of a similar natural outgrowth. I think it's not, it'll emerge naturally over time. And the example I use is like, in the same way that when, Manhattan was settled and people settled around a stream, and then as industries picked up, they turned it into a canal. And then as industry as the canal got disgusting, essentially, they bricked it over and settled, but still were already all settled there, so now they lived. And now if you track sort of the people moving through that street and you visualize their data usage, what they're looking up, what kind of geoservices they're kind of pinging as they do stuff, I think you'd sort of get this kind of metaphorical stream happening basically on the exact or a very similar path of the original stream there. And I think that's interesting. And I think for some people it's frightening, but I think for me, in my kind of, I think it provides an opportunity for a huge amount of discovery and a huge amount of engagement, because having that kind of granular knowledge of a place lets you actually care about it and get invested and think about it in maybe a different way and not just see it as a kind of all homogeneous sameness. So this is my sort of only practical piece of information you're going to get in this. But I just want to say, I think that Google's greatest asset is maps, it's not search, and that their map information will basically change, like that will be the basis for what what Google does in the future. And all of that is sort of, the flow is towards this kind of, who knows, Google Glasses, whatever. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's towards this very localized map topology of information that overlays the world we live in. I mean, augmented reality is a lot of different things and has some really goofy stuff going on, but in some way, data will become sort of localized and universal, more so than it already is, which is a lot. And then I would say that data sets become, then in this world, really valuable, because Google basically doesn't want to write this, and neither does any of the other giant corporations that will be sort of doing the same kind of work. Even open source stuff doesn't, what they want is good content partners, so individual data sets that are vetted and geo-appended become really valuable. And if I were in, the newspaper, magazine, print industry, I think I would be going to a lot of work to make sure that all my stuff had geo-appended information and was sitting in a database, because that valuable content with that kind of structural organization becomes a really valuable asset in a world where you're sort of making a Borgesian one-to-one map of the world. So we're all, okay, so there we go. We're all casual cartographers, and we're discoverers, and we're explorers, but so what? And for me, the so what comes in that we have a function to do. We have a job to perform, and it's to be the countervailing force against the 33,000 McDonald's and the, I had a Walmart map too that was also amazing. But against, to search out the wonders, right? Because if we're writing the map, if by using Google and Foursquare and sort of participating in modern culture, we're writing sort of this new map data environment, then we get a chance to say what's there. We get a chance to actually choose what that looks like. And for Google, it's a lot easier to figure out where all the KFCs are than to figure out where the greatest art projects, public art projects are, or where the beautiful old buildings that don't have historic preservation are, or So we have a job to essentially make the map richer, weirder, more true to the spaces we live in, which are wondrous and filled with unbelievable kinds of places, and I think really imbued with wonder. So there's two rules I add to this besides helping keep the world weird, which is to do this, you have to go down the mysterious alleyway. You have to be willing to sort of go somewhere till someone says, hey, you shouldn't be here. But that hardly ever happens, and I think it's a rewarding way to approach the world. And with all of these tools, with the internet, you can kind of start that process online and then bring it and match it to an offline world. So you sort of say, what's that building I always see? Do some research, go back with more information, and maybe see it in a new light or take a different tact on exploring it. And then no nostalgia is the other rule, which is basically, I don't think you can approach these places with a sense that, I think it's easy to have a version of something, right? Like when I thought about the Arctic Circle, H&M was not part of my vision. But in fact, it's real, it's there, it's a part of the world we live in, and rather than sort of saying, oh, what a disappointment, this wasn't the kind of idyllic, perfect, whatever, whether it's like you get somewhere and there's a lot of tourists and you're like, I hate it, I wanted to just see the thing. I think you have to look at it with open eyes and see what it really is and ask curious questions. I mean, does the Arctic H&M carry extra long underwear? I don't know, you'd think they would. And so I think, you have to be willing to see things as they are and not as you kind of wished they were. So finally, I'll leave a story, personal story. Doing this, I sometimes actually get a little jaded. I get a little sense of like, yeah, I got it. I know where all the stuff is. But last Wednesday, this is the corner of 7th and Avenue A on Manhattan. I've passed here 100 times. It's a normal New York corner. And last Wednesday night, I got together with some friends who do sort of interesting immersive theater stuff. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I showed up on this street at 10 at night. And they took me in here. And we had to cross a roof and then another roof. But it wasn't very rigorous. And we went down in here. And there is an incredible abandoned theater that has been there and been abandoned since 1959. It's been there empty like this for 50 years. And I would guarantee you that that is not a known fact of the neighborhood. It's not like, oh, you mean the abandoned theater? And my mind was really blown, and I was absolutely delighted to have this sense of finding the wondrous, the unexpected, so close to me. And I really think that with the right set of eyes, with a new, a willingness to see things for what they are, and to really to just explore, you can find these things really all over the place. So is there anything left to discover? My answer is an emphatic yes. There is a lot left to discover. And when as you start going down one of these things, it opens up an entire new world for you. Like, as I said, we could have just talked about catacombs because that's an entire world that you can get immersed in, and we could just talk about people who build castles in their backyard. There's a ton of them, and they do it by hand over years and years and years, and then you get these 16-story, in Colorado, there's a 16-story castle called Bishop's Castle. This guy's been working on for the last 40 years of his life, and that's amazing, and it's right there, and it's and so yes, and you are all basically, you have all the tools you need to start exploring, to become a discoverer, so it's not a question of, is there anything left to explore? It's how deep do you want to go? How far into it do you want to get? Thank you very much.